So, what makes a course effective? There's a lot of people out there with advice on how to make great courses. And unfortunately, a lot of the advice that's out there is pretty rudimentary. Like it's kind of logical. Make sure that your courses are concise, make sure they give value. But there's a lot more to courses than that. But I have for you three keys that you need in order to create results for your clients because no one wants to create a course and sell it and then people take the course and they're dissatisfied. I believe most of you want to create courses that people take and get real results from. So there's really three elements that you need to watch, three keys you need to watch when you are designing your course. You can design your course any way you want and then go back and look at these three things. If you can manage these three things, your course will be effective. The first one, and it's probably no surprise, the first one is attention. Can you manage to gain and regain attention? And there is a lot of advice about keeping people's attentions, like hooks and micro learning, and make sure it's short and punchy and all that type of stuff. Now, and there's also a lot of myths about attention too, like people only have the attention span of like a less than a goldfish or some other silly things like that. There's really two aspects to attention. The first is gaining someone's attention. It's like, hello, look at me. And then the second one is maintaining it. And these are two different things. So if people know that what they're going to get out of your course is really going to add value in an area of their life that they really want to see that value, like maybe they're learning a skill that's going to help them be a better parent or a better spouse, or maybe they're learning a skill that's going to help them do better in their job and be successful. So in that case, like attention may not matter so much because they're going to pay attention because they truly believe that what you're giving them is going to matter. So they'll stick in with it, and that's all great. The rule of thumb that I use for this, and of course it is kind of a rule of thumb, and that means that you could break this rule at any time under the right circumstances, is that I try to keep all of the delivery of the content type segments, these lecture type segments, anything that's like that, less than 7 minutes, because, everybody's brain gets tired at that point. And of course, it depends on other factors, like what is the motivation of the student? If you know why they're doing it, they may be, in it, even if it's a hard course, even if it's difficult because they really want what's in that. It also can depend on like the cognitive load of the stuff. And that's actually the next point. So we're going to get to that in a minute. So attention, it is kind of one of those weird things, but you want to really think, and this is actually where your creativity can come out. Your creativity can come out and like, how can I gain attention? How can I maintain attention? How can I interweave stories so that the attention stays with them? So attention is super, super important because if they're not paying attention, they're not learning. And this is probably the hardest one to maintain by far. A lot of courses that you take are just plain boring. So I don't want to be boring. So I'm going to go on to the next point. So the first element is attention. Can you maintain attention? The second element is cognitive load. Now, cognitive load is kind of a cool element. And a lot of people talk about reducing cognitive load. You'll see lots of articles like, what can we do to reduce cognitive load? But the truth is, you don't want the cognitive load to be too low, and you don't want it to be too high. So what happens when you are sitting in a course or in a classroom or someplace else and the cognitive load is really, really low? Well, if that's the case, you're probably going to be much like my daughter right now in one of her classes where she goes and she's like, I'm not learning anything. It's so boring. I can't even stand it anymore. The cognitive load is so low. And what happens with cognitive load being low is it does affect attention. The other part too is it doesn't stick very well. When something is so easy, when something is so easily attainable, when you didn't work for it, when it's not hard at all, I mean, like not hard at all, it actually becomes easier to forget. In an interesting experiment, this one guy, he actually studies the science of forgetting. And one of the things he did was create this informational pamphlet. And the pamphlet was made with super easy to read bullets, and the information was organized so very easily. And another pamphlet, it was not organized as easily. And the study showed that those people who read the more difficult to read pamphlet actually retained the information better. And he did it also in another experiment where he did PowerPoint slides. And in one slide, they had easy to read fonts, and the other slide, the fonts were harder to read. And the retention, just in that small tweak on the cognitive load, it actually improved retention. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to go and create slides with difficult to read fonts. I actually don't recommend that. There are other reasons to keep your slides easy to read other than the retention of information. You have to think about accessibility and people who are maybe sight impaired or low vision. So please make the slides easy to read. But there are other ways to bump up the cognitive load. In that case, you want to keep it in what is called the zone of proximal development, which is a really fancy way of saying that sweet spot in your cognitive load. Too high, people get frustrated and they want to give up, unless, of course, their motivation is high. You can put that cognitive load pretty high and people will go after it. I know that when my dad was studying to get his nuclear power hot license, they had to do a ton of studying in 1 year in order to pass all the exams that required oral exams and written exams and tons of exams in order to get their hot license. And they studied every night and it was difficult, but they were not frustrated by it because they were highly motivated. So that cognitive load could go creep up quite a bit. But if you're going to give a course to somebody where the motivation is low, maybe it's a hobby, maybe you're going to tell them all the sights and sounds and places you should visit during a vacation. If the motivation is low and it's just kind of an easy thing, then you want to lower that cognitive load for that particular group. So it always depends on your audience. You don't want to say a cognitive load should be like a 7.0 and a 1 to 10 scale. I mean, that would be interesting to try and measure that, but it can change based on the motivation of the students. It can change based on the circumstances. So in some cases, you can go with a super, super high cognitive load. In other cases, it's like maybe you just do a fun course on whales and you would keep the cognitive load down a little bit and just make it, super interesting. Okay, so the first element was attention, and the second element is cognitive load. The third element, I don't see this used very much, but it's super important, okay? And this is another one, I would say while attention is one that a lot of people get wrong, this last one is one that a lot of people aren't thinking of at all. And this particular one is discovery. Now, discovery is an interesting thing, and that is the difference between telling your audience and then the other is to set up an environment in which they can discover it for themselves. And there was a saying I went to in a classroom so long ago that I actually don't remember the year. It was probably around 2003, 2004. And I was in a classroom and it was about, learning and how people learn and how to manage a classroom. It was a super great classroom, but, students don't argue with their own data. And that's super interesting. And that's where discovery comes into play. Because the mistake that a lot of course creators make is that they want to shrink down the time. And so they end up depending almost entirely on lecture, kind of like a YouTube video. YouTube videos are full of lectures. There are people talking about a specific topic and they create courses in that way. But what if you could, courses are not a series of YouTube videos. Can you learn from YouTube videos? Yes, but a YouTube video is a resource or it's a reference. You can learn from it, but it's not a course. And so when you are creating courses, you're thinking about activity and how you can get people to play with it. And what's interesting is how can you bring your students along so they can discover the truths rather than you just speaking it for themselves. And you don't want to do it too much because you don't want to do Socratic method where you throw out questions all the time and never give answers. That can be super annoying too. So don't do that. This is also where stories help. Stories help with attention, but they also help with discovery, because often what happens in stories is that the point that you're trying to make is indirect and it's also super emotional. So it's super great. So if you're going to say you want to tell people about the importance of water in some country somewhere, you could bring up the statistics and say, so many people don't have access to fresh water, or they have to spend this much time every day getting access to fresh water, or they can give statistics like that. And then what are students thinking? I wonder where they got those statistics. I wonder how updated they are. I wonder if this is the whole country or just, so you start questioning the validity of the data when you are just pushing data out and telling people what to think. But contrast that with telling a story. So you can say, there's a girl, Sarah, who gets up at 4 o'clock every morning because before she goes to school, she has to make a mile-long trek in the dark to get the water that she needs for her household for that day. So you start telling a story. Now people are coming to their own conclusions. Wow, that I didn't realize that access to water was that meaningful. I didn't realize that it was that impactful. And that means a lot more than just like statistics in some cases. It's often good to put both of them in there, just so you know. But think about how discovery can be used in your courses so that people can come to the conclusions themselves, and then they don't argue with that data, and it ends up being something that they earned, that they got themselves. So let's talk about what happens when we don't have one of these three elements. If you have attention and cognitive load, but you are lacking discovery, what a lot of people think is that you are a great speaker. You've been able to maintain their attention, you have the cognitive load just right, and you have that information, you impress them as having a great teacher and stuff like that, but they didn't discover the information for themselves, so they may not retain it so well. Let's say that cognitive load is missing. You've got the cognitive load off a little bit. You have their attention, you have discovery, so you're able to keep their attention, you're able to, make it so you're telling stories and that, but the cognitive load is off. So maybe it's too high and they're frustrated. They may think that you're super smart, but they still don't get it. It's not effective for them. It's not going to be a great course for them. And then let's say that you have discovery and you have cognitive load, but you haven't been able to maintain attention. So you've got that cognitive load right. It's not too hard. It's not too easy. And you're putting lots of stories in there. You're putting in activities so they can do that. But maybe you're doing a lot of things that are causing them to lose attention. There's a lot of distractions around during this time. In that case, if they're distracted, it's probably going to be boring. And that's how they often see anything that doesn't capture their attention. If it doesn't capture their attention, they assume that it's boring. But imagine a classroom in which you are able to maintain their attention. So they're looking at you and they're interested in what you have to say. And you have that cognitive load just right. It's not too hard. It's not too little. It's just at that right, sweet spot for the cognitive load. And you put in times where they can come to their own conclusions. So they feel as they're going through that it is a discovery for them. It is a path in which they're discovering things on their own, and they can have those aha moments. People don't usually have aha moments from just a lecture. They have aha moments from stories and things that they discover on themselves. Or I've done some really cool activities where I remember this one activity where we had people put things in order on their own without realizing that they were acting on their bias by putting it in order, and revealed it to them. And you could almost hear the gasp in that room as they discovered that they had been acting out of their own bias. And it was just really, really cool. We didn't have to tell them. We just turned over the things and we let them come to their own conclusion on that. Super powerful. So you get a classroom where there's attention, cognitive load, and discovery, and you're going to have a class, a course in which people are going to get fantastic results. So how do you create a course that's effective? You manage these three keys. And these three keys, there's lots of strategies on how to get these three keys. So, don't get me wrong, microlearning is important. Gamification is really fabulous for attention. There's lots and lots of ways, that we manage these particular three keys. But really think about it when you create your course. Go back. Where's my attention? Where's the attention of the student at this moment? What is the cognitive load for the student? Where are the moments that they're discovering things on their own versus me just speaking them all out? That's how I use these particular three elements. I go back and I review my design and I see where can I make some tweaks in order to improve the effectiveness of that course. Now, if you are interested in more videos like this, be sure to like and subscribe this channel, and you'll see a lot more where this is coming from. I have so much to share with you guys. Have a beautiful day.